Hey, it's me, Abby P. What up, my people? So I had the privilege of interviewing a well-known polyglot and linguist in the language community named Steve Kaufmann, who is the co-founder of the language learning website Link, along with his son, Mark. Before I show the interview, please note that I went ahead and put in timestamps in my pinned comment down below for specific questions, but of course, I suggest that you watch the entire interview to get the full tips and motivation for your language learning. I learned a lot and was very inspired by this interview, so I hope it's the same for you. Today, we have a very special guest with us. As a teacher and a language learner myself, he is someone that I look up to. He is living proof that it doesn't matter what age you are, you can learn whatever language you want, whenever you want, and have fun while doing it. Please welcome the incredible Steve Kaufmann.
Oh, not so incredible, but happy to be here, and I enjoy connecting with people who are enthusiastic about learning languages.
Thank you so much for being here. And starting off, can you please introduce yourself to my viewers?
Okay, so I'm, a 74-year-old grandpa here in Vancouver, British Columbia. For 7 years, I was a Canadian diplomat, which took me to Hong Kong to learn Mandarin Chinese and took me to Japan. But then I left the Foreign Service and worked in the wood industry for about 40 years for a couple of large Canadian exporting companies, and then set up my own company, initially doing a lot of business into Japan. Along the way, because we did a lot of business in Europe as well, so German, Swedish, obviously French, because I studied in France. I took my university training there. So I learned a bunch of languages. Getting close to the age of 60, I got interested in this whole issue of language learning. Decided to learn Russian because my approach to language learning is to de-emphasize grammar, and people would challenge me and say, well, that might work for Asian languages, which are not so grammar heavy, but it won't work for Russian. So, okay, we'll give Russian, a try. So I did Russian, and then together with my son, we developed a website for language learning called Link. And as part of the various activities that I get involved with to try and promote Link, quite frankly, I have a channel here on YouTube where I encourage people to learn languages, and I speak in different languages. So the website is Link, and my channel is Lingo Steve.
So I will be putting all of Steve's links down in the description box below. And starting off, Steve is gonna do just a little greeting in some of the languages that he knows. Steve, you know about like 20 languages, I think it is?
Well, you gotta be fair on all this stuff. So 12 languages I could easily switch into now and speak and understand. Another 8 or 9 I have at times been able to speak, sort of worked on them very hard before going to the country like Greece or Romania, but I would struggle to speak them now, but I could bring them back. And right now I'm working on Arabic and Persian, so varying degrees. And I think it's very important that we allow ourselves the luxury of making mistakes and doing poorly. So I'm quite happy to do poorly. But I will start typically the languages that I speak the best and work my way down.
Okay,
so,
great.
Bonjour mes amis, c'est un grand plaisir d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui. That you know what language that is, of course.
French.
French, right.
Yes.
And then comes 日本語。それで、今日はね、皆さんと一緒になってですね、いろいろとその言葉の勉強について話できると非常に幸いです。
すごい。
Japanese, right? Then 我很高兴有这个机会跟大家在一起谈这个学语言的这个问题。
Amazing, yes. Chinese.
Okay.
Mandarin.
Me gusta mucho aprender idiomas, por eso me gusta siempre encontrar gente a quienes le gusta también estudiar idiomas.
Muy bien.
Español.
Español.
Sí, por supuesto. Ich habe sehr gern Sprachen zu lernen. I better shorten these up or we'll be forever. Ich habe sehr gern Sprachen zu lernen.
I'm enjoying this.
Sprachen zu lernen. Ja, guten Abend oder guten Morgen. Also, es macht sehr viel Spaß hier mit Ihnen zu reden über Sprachen lernen. Deutsch, ne?
Deutsch.
Jag tycker mycket om att lära sig språk, Jag har lärt mig liksom svenska och många olika språk som jag också använder i mitt arbete. Swedish.
Oh, Swedish.
Falo português, ma mi português mais ou menos portunhol, não? Porque falo espanhol muito melhor do português. Mas também entendo tudo e posso falar. No? Portuguese, my Portuguese is heavily influenced by my Spanish. I've never really put enough time into it. Posso parlare italiano perché è una lingua molto, come si dice, non è la stessa cosa che lo spagnolo, ma è una lingua con molta storia e mi piace molto parlare italiano. Italiano? OK。
哦，Italiano。
我都可以講廣東話喎，你知唔知廣東話呢同國語唔係一樣嘅？
Cantonese.
Yeah. Я могу говорить по-русски. тоже. Хотя я не очень, скажем так, когда я говорю по-русски, я сделаю много-много ошибок. Но все равно я могу общаться, я понимаю. И мне очень нравится говорить по-русски. И читать, и слушать.
Is that Russian?
Yeah.
Wow.
Я
Amazing.
також розмовляю українською мовою. Українською.
Ukrainian.
Розмовляю. Я говорю по-русски, but розмовляю українською мовою. And the grammatical structure is actually different.
Oh, really?
So, I mean, then after that it starts to... Mówim czeski, no, mluvim czeski, mówim po polsku. Now, if we get into Greek, boy, it gets difficult. Milao Elenika, Vorbesk, Limba Romena, and Al-An, Ana, أدرس اللغة العربية. هي من صعبة، ليس سهلة. في نفس الوقت من زبان فارسی یاد میگیرم. زبان فارسی آسان‌تره. Yeah, it's easier than. Now I'm totally confused. So I'm
You're
done.
doing great. That was
I maybe
amazing.
left a few out there along the way, but that's
No worries.
Oh, I forgot.
Yeah.
한국어. 제가
맞아요.
한국어 네 맞아요.
좋아요.
근데 지금 오래간만 한국어 공부 못해서 왜냐하면 지금 잘 못합니다. 그러나 만약 더 얘기하면 I can only improve.
맞아요. Fighting.
화이팅.
May I teach you a greeting in Tagalog, the Filipino language? For my Filipino
absolutely.
Viewers? Okay,
Yes,
great.
yes.
How about I'll teach you, how are you? I am Steve. And then how about we'll throw in like a long live the Philippines. How's that?
Okay. Good.
So first off, kumusta? Kumusta?
Oh, it's like Spanish.
Yes,
Kumusta?
¿Cómo estás? Yes, right. Spanish influence.
Kumusta?
So kumusta? How are you?
Kumusta?
Ako si Steve.
Ako
si
si
Steve. Yes.
Ako si Steve.
Yes, I am Steve. Ako si Steve.
Okay, ako si Steve.
Kumusta? Ako si Steve.
Kumusta? Ako si Steve.
And
Mabuhay ang Pilipinas.
amazing. Maraming salamat. It's kind of like a
Okay.
Viva España, Viva Mexico kind of feel.
Okay, mabuhay.
Thank you, Steve. So we're gonna jump right into my questions and then questions for my viewers. You explained to us how you got into languages there in the beginning. So for those that are outside of or new to the language community, how can you define polyglot and linguist, and which do you identify more with?
Okay, so in English, the word polyglot is not widely used. I think a majority of native speakers of English have never used the word polyglot. And in English, the word linguist means someone who is good at languages and who speaks many languages. And so I began by calling myself a linguist because that was the term that I was familiar with. And of course, you then get a bunch of angry people on the internet who have studied linguistics and say, you are a imposter, you are a charlatan, whatever. But I now have basically gotten used to the term polyglot, but they mean the same. So polyglot, many tongues, is someone who speaks many languages. How many? I don't know that there's a definition. I mean, we can also say bilingual, trilingual, multilingual, quadrilingual, whatever. There are no definitions. I think anyone who speaks more than one language is to be, praised. And if you speak 3 languages, so much the better. And once you get to 3, then you want to get to 4 and 5 and 6, and you're on your way to becoming a polyglot.
So it does get easier to learn another language after.
Absolutely. First of all, until you have become fluent in one sort of second language, you don't believe you can do it. Once you've done it, you have the confidence that you can do it, and therefore you feel more confident approaching another language. Also, your brain becomes more flexible. You're more flexible when it comes to different sounds, different structures. You develop techniques for learning. You get better at it. So there's no question that the more languages you learn, the better you are at learning languages.
What is the best thing someone can do if they don't study languages often or don't have a lot of time to, but they are interested?
Well, to me, the easiest thing to do is listen. So, so I get in 45 minutes to an hour a day listening. I get up in the morning, I make breakfast typically, I listen. I clean up after breakfast, I listen. I've become a model husband because I don't mind doing all the household chores because I can listen while I'm doing them. I listen in the car. I work out most days. I listen. So the listening is so easy to do. And I have a strategy for listening. I have very sort of easy material that I listen to often compared to more difficult material that I'm struggling with. But in both cases, after listening, I want to read what I listen to, because it can't just be noise. It has to be something that you have a chance of understanding. If I'm using LingQ, then I look up words and I review the words. So the goal is that the listening, first of all, it makes you more familiar with the language. It triggers curiosity about what you are listening to, and then you read it, and then you start to acquire vocabulary. And so everyone has 45 minutes or an hour of dead time a day that they can devote to listening. It's just a matter of whether you choose to do it. But everyone has that. And then you just got to find another half hour or so to do some reading, or, the kinds of activities we have on LingQ, or whether you like using Anki, or you like reading a book, or whatever you do. So between the 45 minutes of dead time and another half hour or so, that's not a lot. You can do that. And then at some point, your other activities start to involve language. So if you like to listen to music, if you like to watch soap operas on Netflix, then you can make those part of your language learning activity.
Okay, that's a relief, because I am huge on music. I love music, so
right.
If anything, I try to get in some songs in German, Japanese throughout the day. And I think a lot of us have so many hobbies, and there's so many things we have to do throughout the day that it's hard sometimes to make time for studying. So
it's a choice. I mean, it's the trouble is, so that's why I think it's important to get to the stage where you're listening to stuff that's interesting. But unfortunately, for the initial 3 months, 6 months, you have to deal with stuff that's less interesting, because you can't understand the really interesting stuff. And and we can get into my problems with Korean, but one of the problems in Korean and a number of other languages is that there's an abundance of boring beginner material, and there's not an awful lot of interesting but not too difficult, or even where they have podcasts. I found good Korean podcasts on politics, on literature, whatever. No transcripts. In Russian and Czech and Chinese, when I was doing it, there was a lot of material that was interesting that would take you along from beginner to intermediate to advanced. Where that range of content is not available, and it just becomes a matter of drudgery of trying to learn the language, we can easily, lose interest.
The next language I would officially like to start learning is Mandarin Chinese,
right,
which you are amazing at. I've seen your videos speaking in Mandarin. I've looked at the comments and saw all of the praise you got. And to me already it sounded amazing, your accent, like everything. So any tips that you have for me starting out based on your experience?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, and the same holds true for Japanese. You have to invest in the characters. There's a major investment in learning the characters. I don't think you can learn Chinese. I mean, unless you're living in Beijing and you're talking to people every day and you're picking it up just by hearing it. But if you really want to get into Chinese, and any language I get into, I want to learn about the culture, I want to learn about the history, I want to be able to read, I want to hear, serious adult discussions, conversations. You need vocabulary, and you need to be able to read. So that's the first thing. Make that investment. Plan on trying to learn 10 characters a day, which is what I did, and then I got it up to 30 a day. Remembering that you're going to forget 2/3 of what you learn. And so you have to relearn it. That's true of all vocabulary, but particularly with characters. Because, you got to learn 8, 10, 12, 13, 15 strokes for each one of these 3,000, 4,000 characters that you have to learn. It's a lot of work. But like so many things in language learning, it's not impossible. You just have to keep at it. Lots of people have done it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the pronunciation of the sounds in Mandarin is not difficult. They're in many ways similar to English, the actual sounds. It sounds strange to us because of the tones, but the actual vowels and consonants are very similar to English, or to what we're used to in other languages. Not difficult. So then the tones. You can try to remember the tones of individual words to some extent when you have a few words. But when you have many, many, many words, it's very hard to remember what tone they are. The strategy that I took, first of all, was a lot of listening, so you start to get the rhythm, the music of the language. And I listened a lot. There's a form of comic dialogue called xiangsheng, and there they exaggerate the tones. So it's almost like listening to music. And so you, because you have to get the rhythm, you have to get the intonation. And so you should be listening to short bits, short phrases, short sentences, and repeating them. If you try to just first tone, second tone, third tone, you've got to know like automatically, because you've heard the phrase so often, you've used the phrase, and you just go for it. Don't try to think about, is it first tone, second tone, third tone? It's too difficult to remember. And don't worry if you get the odd tone wrong. I mean, you're only going to get better. It's like when I speak Slavic languages, I get my case endings wrong, but I'm gradually getting better. And then if I leave it for a while, I get worse. When I get back to it, I get better. So perfection is not the goal, but try to get a sense of the intonation. And the Chinese grammar is the easiest grammar of any language I've ever learned.
Ooh,
I go today, I go yesterday, I go tomorrow, you go, he go, we go, they go. It's very efficient in that way. There's less junk code. Like I consider all these complicated grammar rules to be
right, like in English.
Yeah.
So many exceptions.
Junk code. You don't need it.
And so next we're going to go into some questions from my viewers.
Okay.
The first one is, if someone wants to approach a new language, do you think complete immersion is more effective or studying it structurally and formally like in a class?
Okay, so first of all, I tend not to go to class. It's expensive. You got to get yourself to the class. Teachers want to teach stuff. I don't really believe in teaching a language. I think you just have to learn it. Now, in terms of immersion, so immersion implies you just go there. But I don't think that's very efficient either because you can't say anything. So even when I went to Japan and I would use whatever little bit of Japanese I had, I would use it on shopkeepers or wherever I could. But the bulk of my learning was listening and reading. In my car, I'd be listening, I'd be reading, listening and reading, listening and reading. It all boils down to listening and reading. And in particular, I have found that now that we have these mini stories with circling questions at link, I find that very efficient. So I jumped into my Greek from zero right into the mini stories, Persian, Arabic, the same way, Turkish the same way. And you just listen to these over and over again, all of the high frequency verbs, the most common conjunctions. In each story, the vocabulary repeats 5 times in different forms because it's like either the person changes or the tense changes, but it's the same story. And then there's a series of questions. A statement is made that comes from the story, then there's a question about that statement, and then the answer is provided. You don't have to think what happened in the story. You just hear it 3 times. It's just more exposure. And I listen to these like story 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, back to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, back to 1. And then I listen and I read it and I look up words. And what was noise at the beginning, within a few weeks, it starts to make sense. And if I want some information about how the language works, I can look it up. I mean, you just Google anything. You want to Google Greek verbs, Arabic verbs, anything you want is there for you. You don't need a teacher to deliver the language to you. You listen and read, and when you're curious, you look up and you get a little bit of a summary of how it works. Or you buy the smallest little grammar book you can find, give you a bit of an overview without trying to remember anything.
Okay, so then out of the 4 skills of speaking, listening, reading, and writing, so you'd say reading and listening are probably the most important, especially in the beginning?
Well, insofar as activities, learning activities, I think reading and listening are the most important. In terms of the skill you need to be successful, I think we all want to have the skill of speaking well. That's the one that we all want to achieve. That's how they measure you.
Well,
that's what we want to do. We meet someone, from the Philippines. We want to show off our Tagalog.
Yes.
We don't want to haul out a book and read to them. We want to speak.
Write them an essay.
Yeah, but I think the skill that we need is comprehension. If we have good listening comprehension, then our speaking will come. And listening comprehension means vocabulary. Because the native speaker, and I mean passive vocabulary, because the native speaker has a much larger vocabulary than you will ever have, okay? Because the native speaker has been with his or her language all their life, right? So you're never going to have their vocabulary. So they're going to use more words. So you at least have to be able to understand what they're saying. And if you have good comprehension, you can watch movies, you can listen to songs, you can listen to podcasts. So to me, the key skill to build up initially is not the ability to speak, it's the ability to understand. And if you do that, you can develop it. When the opportunity comes your way, if you have good comprehension, your speaking ability will develop. And of course, when you speak, you don't want to worry. If you understand what the other person is saying, you worry less. I never find it intimidating to be in a situation where I struggle to say what I want to say, as long as I can understand what they're saying. It's when I don't understand what they're saying that I feel quite, intimidated. So yeah, the skill to work on initially to me is comprehension, and that means lots of listening and reading. Now, Obviously, speaking helps you with your comprehension. So when you speak, you realize where you messed up. You realize the words you couldn't remember. So a whole bunch of stuff. So it's good. It triggers renewed interest in listening and reading. So, oh, gee, I didn't do too well. I'm going to go back to my listening and reading and build up my comprehension. The speaking is there, but in terms of priorities, to me, listening and reading. And writing only if you're going to pass a test. I never bother with the writing because I'm not passing any tests.
Okay, so any tips or methods on how to study multiple languages at the same time?
Well, I'm doing it right now. It's not something I've tended to do because obviously, if your goal is to learn language A, you're better off to just learn language A. But because I want to learn 3 languages in the Middle East, I want to learn Persian, Arabic, and Turkish. So in the end, I want to end up speaking 3. Each one of them is going to take a long time. Arabic, the longest. Arabic is the most difficult of the 3. So if I'm going to be 2 or 3 years in Arabic, and let's say I did a bit of Farsi and I did a bit of Turkish, if I leave them for 3 years and then go back to them, I'll have forgotten too much. So I'm saying it's less efficient in a way to be doing Arabic. I dropped the Turkish for now because it's easier. It's written in the Latin script, it's easier. So working on Persian and Arabic, and I would do better if I just focused on Arabic. But maybe at the end of 3 years, I'll be a little bit further ahead in both than if I had gone 2.5 years in Arabic and then gone to Persian. So it depends what your goals are. The other thing is, no matter what we do, there is a certain fatigue that sets in. For example, we know from cognitive science that you don't want to try to ace anything. You don't want to sit there with a list of words and you're going to ace this. That's very bad. You want to wander around, come across the words in this context and that context and forget them and come across them again and learn them again. The sort of meandering learning. So I'll be doing Arabic for 3 or 4 days and then I switch to Persian. So now the Persian is like, wow, it's fun again. And then I leave the Arabic, and when I go back to the Arabic is fun again. The brain likes repetition, but the brain likes novelty. There's this German neuroscientist who wrote a great book. The brain requires repetition and novelty. So to that extent, if you're doing 2 languages, you are providing a little bit of novelty to your brain. But I think if you're determined to learn language A in the shortest possible time, I'm sure you're better off to focus on 1 language only. And as to how to divide your time, I tried doing 2 languages in the same day. That doesn't work. So I tend to go 3 days on one, 3 days on the other.
Yeah, so I think it's important for others to know that language learning should come naturally, right? You're not trying to force yourself to sit down and learn this language on this day and then this language. It's sort of just what you said, going back and forth, meandering through the different materials and languages and such. Right.
Now, I'm not trying to write, HSK or whatever the tests are in Korea or Japan. I'm not writing these, IELTS or anything.
JLPT.
So.
Then how do you separate or switch between languages especially when speaking? How do you not get confused? Because I do get this question a lot, especially from other language learners, where they're speaking in Korean, for example, but their Japanese is a lot stronger, so then they'll mix in some Japanese. So how does your brain work then?
Well, so I think those languages that I have listened to a lot, those are my strongest 12 languages. I tend not to. I'm not going to confuse Cantonese and Mandarin. There's certainly languages that are so similar, like Portuguese and Spanish. I have to struggle to stay into Portuguese, but I don't struggle if I'm speaking Spanish. If I'm there, like I was in Brazil for a few days or a week or whatever it was, then I'm doing fine. And it may be that when you first switch, there's a certain rustiness. It's not a big problem, but my weak languages, it's a problem. Of course, you're going to get them mixed up. And certainly the stronger languages. So the funny thing is, Japanese, if I'm struggling with a language, Japanese tends to pop in there. It just does. I lived in Japan for 9 years.
Oh, wow.
So
long time. So then how do you stay motivated to keep learning these languages?
Okay, why did I learn language X? There's always a reason. Right now, I'm interested in the Middle East, so I'm interested in learning Arabic, Turkish, Persian. Together with that, I'm reading about the area, reading about history. In fact, we have a collaborator in Iran who has produced a 26-episode sort of history of Iran in simple Persian with circling questions. So I learn about Iranian. It's fascinating. It just opens it all up. And as a result of doing that, then I buy a book in English about Iran, and then I discover that Persian culture had a massive influence on India. And so I'm already looking forward to when I have come far enough in my Arabic, Persian, and Turkish, I want to learn Urdu, which is a language of Pakistan, really, which is it's like Hindi, except it's written in the Arabic alphabet. So you're just learning about the world, and all these different places come alive in a way that they don't if you can only read in English. So I have no problem with the motivation. What I am driven more by is learning more about the culture. More in the culture. I know you're more into music and songs and pop culture, and I think most people are. I'm just an older...
Oh no, I do love culture too. That's one of
Right.
my main focuses with studying languages as well. So definitely culture and history too. I actually have an
History,
interest in
yeah, I
learning
love it.
history as well. So my last question is then, what would you consider fluency in a language, and how long does it take to get there? A lot of
Okay,
people
so-
wonder that.
Yeah, so to me, fluency is... Are you familiar with the European framework?
No, what is that?
There are 6 levels. Okay, that's very commonly used framework to describe people's levels. So A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2.
Oh, okay, yes. I've heard
Yeah,
of
so A is beginner, B is intermediate. So upper intermediate is B2. To me, upper intermediate, B2 means that you can comfortably communicate on a wide range of subjects. You will make mistakes, but you understand most of what's going on. You can be in a conversation with 5 other people speaking, crossfire. You're able to follow on what they're saying, but you make mistakes. And there's the odd word you don't know. And to me, that's B2, that's upper intermediate. To me, that's fluency. Once you're into the C, the advanced level, now you can read literature, you can express yourself with elegance on whatever. That's better. But you don't need that to be fluent. But I have had people say, well, you can be fluent if you have 500 words. I don't believe that for a second. Well, if I can, order a beer fluently, then I'm fluent. No, you're not. You need lots, like 10, 20,000 words, like lots of words in order to be comfortable.
Vocabulary.
You need vocabulary. And how long it takes depends on how similar the language is to a language you already know. Now, if you're an English speaker learning French, you've got half the words because, you're French, about half the words resemble English words. You can become fluent in a year. You can become fluent in less than a year. If you're a Spanish speaker learning Portuguese, and if you're motivated, in 3 months, you're almost fluent right away because they're so close. They're almost the same language. Chinese, Korean, Japanese, if you're an English speaker, these are much more difficult because there are no freebies. Even the loan words, you don't even recognize them. I saw one the other day. I have these interviews with people like we're doing now, and there's a term in Japanese, korabo.
Collaboration.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
but then you wouldn't know that sometimes.
No,
like if you're just
no.
learning the language, you're
That's
like,
right.
let's go collab. Yeah.
So those take longer to reach fluency, and if I look at myself, and it depends how much time you have per day. When I was doing Chinese, I was a full-time language student, paid for. I was working for the Canadian government. They were paying me a salary. I had a job to do, learn Chinese. So I was going out 7-8 hours a day, and I passed my exams at the end of the 9 months. The British Foreign Service exam. I was translating, newspaper editorials from English into Chinese, from Chinese into English. I read a novel, but I was like a maniac, right? I had nothing else to do. If you're doing it an hour and a half or so a day, then difficult language, you're looking at years, 2-3 years.
Yeah, because when people ask me, how long does it take to get fluent? I think, how hard are you willing to work?
Exactly.
That's what kind of mindset that I have. And then to end things, I think a lot of my viewers would really enjoy to hear us speak in Korean if
Okay.
you're comfortable with that.
I will give it a try. I will.
마지막으로
마지막으로.
한국말로 얘기합시다.
네, 제게 한국어 어려워요.
어려워요.
6년 전에 공부해서 그러나 그 후에 다른 언어 공부하기, 러시아어 많이 다른 언어 공부하고
관심 많이 생겼어요.
한국어의 문제가 제게 재미있는 내용이 많이 없어요. 재미있는 과 가장 어려웠지. like not too difficult. 어려운 내용이 없어서 다른 언어 공부 시작했습니다. 그렇지만 제가 다시 한번 공부하고 싶습니다. 또 6개월 공부하면 아마도 한국어도 그 가능성이 있어요.
저도 그렇게 생각해요. 그래도 스티브 씨는 진짜 잘하시네요.
아니요.
진짜요?
한국어의 발음은 아주 좋아합니다. 아주 좋아합니다. 한국어의
the
발음이
sounds are
the
very
sounds,
interesting.
I love it. 네, 발음 맞아요.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I'd like to get into it. There's a lot of silly, I wouldn't say silly, but a lot of beginner stuff is silly stuff. And even the early intermediate stuff is silly stuff. Like, for example, this Iranian girl who did these 26 episodes on Persian history. Simplified with these questions and everything. If I could find someone who would do that in Korean, so 26 episodes, history of Korea with questions, I'd be all over that. I listened to it many, many times. But there isn't. It would be of more interest to me, and interest is so important in language learning, if there was something on the history, starting way back whenever, you know, in the history of Korea and the Three Kingdoms and all this kind of stuff, which I kind of have a very vague sense of, and to learn that in Korean at a Korean level that's not too difficult, to me would be ideal learning material if anybody ever produces material of that nature.
Right. You just got to find the right materials and things to interest us. I totally agree. Thank you so much, Steve. Is there anything else that you'd like to add about language learning or linguist?
Well, I don't want to get into too much on. I certainly would encourage people to have a look, but I don't want to get into the details on that. It's certainly where I like to study, but people have their own ways that they like to learn. One thing that I think Korean and the interest in Korean has shown is that, you know, people today are interested in a wide variety of things for a variety of different reasons. For example, China is 1.5 billion people, and they're putting all kinds of money into promoting the Chinese language and so forth. And there's probably as much interest in Korean as there is in Chinese, because people are interested in what they're interested in. And so you got K-pop, and you got the Korean drama, and you got things that have this appeal. Around the world, like, I don't know anything about Mongolia or Estonia or... That's why I don't know if you know Moses McCormick, but
Yes, I love his videos too. I watched
so
your interview
I respect
with him.
so I respect the fact that he goes off and he explores Georgian and Hmong and Swahili, and every one of these countries has something of interest. And Korean is certainly one of the more studied languages, let's say, of that, you know, once you get past the Spanish, French, English, Chinese, then Korean is very popular. And there's so many places to discover through language. So I encourage people to study languages.
Yes. Well, I'll be looking forward to your future videos and contents, and keep on inspiring other people to learn languages. And thanks so much for your time today, Steve.
Thank you very much, Abby. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Hope you enjoyed this interview. I'll provide you with a link down in the description box below to sign up with Link. That'll give you a 35% discount on a premium 1-year account. I've already started using the website myself, and it's just another good language resource that's available for you. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel, and I will leave you with this week's comment shout out. Thanks guys, see you in the next one.